Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's event with Open Inclusion. My name is Christopher, and I am the EMEA lead for accessibility and disability inclusion for Google. So which means I get yelled at by everybody in Africa, Middle East, and here, Europe and the UK when it comes to issues around disability inclusion and accessibility. Welcome to my second home. This is the Accessibility Discovery Center, a place where we tell people about what's possible regarding technology and AI, have conversations with the community, talk with business leaders, governmental officials, to teach them about inclusion and the needs of people with disabilities. One housekeeping thing, we don't expect to have any fire training. If you hear a fire alarm, it's real, but don't panic, because Hans will be with us, I'm here, and we'll carefully make sure everyone gets out safely. So if you do hear an alarm, it's real, but it's cool. So with that, Christine, welcome.
Can I just say thank you so much to Google for hosting us here today. They are the hostess with Moses, so Christopher, Hans, thank you so much for making us so welcome here in your home. It's my real pleasure to welcome you here today. We've been doing this work with the Centre for Doctoral Training, really training the researchers and the current cohort about that intersection of AI and disability, a space that we have been very focused on at Open, both because of the potential and the excitement of opportunity in this space for people with disabilities, but also for the opportunity to find new ways of excluding people through algorithmic bias and implications. So today is really looking at those two sides of new power coming through and thinking about what that means. Just today, a little bit of a run of shows so that you know who's coming and what's happening. We're going to start with Adrian from the Centre for Doctoral Training at University of Surrey, sharing a little bit about the program and its objectives. Then Michelle and I are going to share some fresh research that we did. And we did this actually so that the students had something to actually look into that was brand new and take meaning from research. And it's a piece of mixed methodology research with experts, some of which are in this room. Thank you, Joe. Many of whom are not because they were scattered across the world, and with 500 people from across the UK from a consumer nationally representative group. So we'll be sharing that research. Then we're going to have two of my colleagues that we've been teaching out of the Centre for Doctoral Training, Brendan and Anna, share their perspectives on the insights and also just on AI and how thinking about this as we're teaching the students and thinking about the future of where this technology might go has them both excited and concerned. And then we'll finish with Christopher, sharing from a corporate perspective and a technology creator. And for your whole career, Christopher, been working at that emerging tech space and human concerns and interests, where you feel we can really practically apply this, because at the end of the day, insight is only as good as the actions that we take on the basis of it. Right, on that note, Adrian, it's my pleasure to welcome you up.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you all for coming to this. What I want to do is just spend a few minutes talking about the Centre for Doctoral Training, which is an opportunity really, and one of the drivers, certainly the driver behind us working with Open Inclusion at this stage, but the driver behind an activity in this area that is really an opportunity, I think. And it spans between AI and all the tech that goes into AI, and essentially using inclusive design for technologies that will address inclusion, particularly in media. So that's what I would like to speak about in a few minutes. I do have a video in here. The sound's not going to work properly, but we'll give it a go anyway. But let's get to that. So why are we interested in media and digital media in particular? I'm being waved to stand behind here. Okay, I won't wander around. Just put my hands behind my back as well. So we all use media as a primary interface now. So whether you're accessing your bank, you're accessing healthcare, you're watching a program, educational content, it's all through a media-related interface. And in general, those interfaces are designed in one way for everyone, with maybe a few additions, but not really thinking about how do you address the individual and the individual needs. So at its center, the motivation for this whole program was that AI could be an enabler to address that, to be able to personalize or adapt the media content to your individual requirements, or requirements of sectors of the population. And that might be your interest, or it might be an accessibility need. It goes across that. But how do we use AI to do that is kind of the central question. So the CDT is really aimed at bringing together researchers, giving them the training, the skills to be able to start to address this problem, and bringing expertise and experience from different backgrounds. It's not an AI problem in itself. I mean, it's almost not a technology problem. You need the technology there because that's an enabler. But the creative skills behind media and the skills behind understanding inclusive design, which is where Open Inclusion come in with us as a training partner. So that's really what the Centre for Doctoral Training is about. It's two institutions have come together to deliver this. The University of Surrey, which has an expertise going back some 40 years in AI, and particularly people-centered AI, so really focused on problems where AI meets people as a direction. And Story Futures at Royal Holloway, which have expertise in creative arts, creative practice, immersive technologies, and user-centered design. So what we're trying to do is bring together that as the background, the foundation, and then working with partners like Open Inclusion to bring in expertise and training that we don't have enough of. And in the background, things like the CoStar program, which is a national program just being launched to support creative industries R&D. So that gives us the right environment for this. And then what we're trying to do is then train future leaders, I suppose, creative industry leaders or broadly across industry, and seed a population of researchers with that breadth of experience. So with design experience, inclusive design experience, together with some understanding and the ability to use AI. So the training program, in very high-level terms, looks like this. It has 3 pillars to it. One is creative practice. The second one is responsible AI. And the third one, which is the critical glue really here, is the inclusive design. And getting our researchers to understand how to work with users of the technology and how to, from the start, be able to think through the issues with the technology. So that's what we see as something new here, and something different about this particular training program, an opportunity to train 80 PhDs in this space, which is a starting point. The other aspect of the training program, and perhaps one that's most relevant to the audience here, is that we frame this around a challenge-led research training program. And the idea of the challenges is that we bring in external organizations, stakeholder organizations, industry, to work with the researchers in multidisciplinary teams to really look at addressing real-world problems and delivering impact through this. So that's where we're looking to have conversations and bring people into this. So challenge-led research, real-world problems, and understanding and addressing some of these fundamental barriers, I think. And how do we design AI to enable solutions or avoid introducing new barriers? So the idea is we have roughly 16 PhDs a year. They'll work in teams with multidisciplinary expertise and work with collaborators, industry partners, stakeholders, really to develop solutions and try and deliver those out. So what I'm going to do next is play the video. You may not be able to hear it at the back. My apologies for that. We'll send around a YouTube link or something like that afterwards. But the video is about the challenges and our initial experience. So when we had our first cohort of students last October, 11 researchers joined the program. And in the first month, we had various different induction things, one of which was a week-long mini challenge with some industry partners, 6 industry partners coming in and presenting challenges and then having a very fast sprint working on addressing those challenges. Our Centre for Doctoral Training brings together expertise from across 2 universities. The University of Surrey, expertise in AI, Royal Holloway, expertise in storytelling and future immersive technologies. We have a challenge model where researchers work together in teams to address real-world challenges and drive impact.
For too long, media has been one size fits all. The dream is to really make media properly inclusive for all audiences.
I think coming together in this unique environment gives us a real opportunity to enact change, to ask the big questions in a safe environment outside of business that typically moves very, very fast.
When you sort of think about the future of AI, it is incredibly challenging because the pace of advancement is faster than anything that I've sort of seen in my professional career.
AI technology has huge potential to improve both accessibility and personalisation on the TV, but there's many challenges.
A lot of people feel that AI is going to steal their jobs. My experience in the heritage sector is that people will lose their jobs by not adopting.
We will look at cultural and social shifts, and we will think about technology. So for the example, the use of AI in a responsible and ethical way. Being in a room with technology partners is really important for Channel 4.
We've come to a room where the experts are.
I don't know the answer, and I'd like you to help me find it.
We're a large organisation and we collaborate with many different, very, very smart, intelligent people, but we don't often get the opportunity to collaborate with people outside of our immediate industry.
Taken what's worked for these organisations and use AI and personalisation to take that to the next level.
Our project really responds to the challenges presented by English heritage, but also that other heritage sites and organisations may also have as well.
A combination of OpenAI vision models with control nets.
It actually adapts to the real-time nature of a complex tool like Unreal.
And so seeing a broad perspective from people with different backgrounds outside of the ones I normally hear from is really exciting.
I think one of the real values for us is being at the forefront of technology.
We're able to sort of get back results to problems that we might not be able to solve on our own.
But also the way in which they've creatively worked together to come up with some of the ideas which also have got commercial value, but also really tackle those underlying issues of inclusion and relevancy.
Not only have the inclusion researchers come up with viable solutions, they've come up with things that our industry partners are saying they could roll out today.
Okay, I will wrap up at that point. We'd love to speak with you. We'd love to get more people involved. We're just at the first stage of this. This was a snapshot of a week's challenge. The next set will roll out as a 3-month challenge. So really trying to achieve some impact. And if you're interested, there's some contact details here and some individuals in the room, the ones marked in green on here, for your reference. So, and Amanda, who's in the middle there, is our industry partner lead. So if you are interested, do speak with her. Thank you.
One of the things we did with them was we ran some fresh research so that they had something really quite real to learn how to firstly think about and design research. They had to design some research for the mini challenge, and secondly to really think about how you take insights, data, a lot of quite rich insights from interviews and focus groups and so on, and come to something useful with that, come to something that is actually shareable. So what we're going to do today is we've also done that work ourselves. We did our own homework, and we're going to share with you today a little bit about what we saw in the research that we had the pleasure of running last year as part of this study.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Parfitt. I'm a research manager at Open Inclusion, and Christine and I are going to talk you through this new research that we did along with CDT. So, as I'm sure you all probably know, there's been a lot of research in AI around perceptions within the general population about how people feel about it, their attitudes, but there hasn't been as much in terms of what disabled people versus non-disabled people feel towards that space. And so that's what we wanted to dive into a little bit more and understand the differences between those groups as well as perhaps some similarities. So to do that, we ran a survey with just over 500 people, but it included a cohort of 200 disabled respondents as well. And we wanted to complement that with some voices from industry experts. So we ran a roundtable with 11 industry experts and then also ran the following 6 one-hour interviews as well. And just to say that all of this research has been designed with, for and by disabled people, so right from kind of like the design, facilitation and delivery of that research, and also within the participants who we included in the research. So to give you a brief overview of what we covered in that survey, so we wanted to understand people's overall awareness and current usage of AI. We wanted to understand attitudes to current and future uses of AI. We also wanted to delve into 3 specific use cases of AI. So the ones that we chose, obviously we would have wanted to choose loads more, but we were a bit constrained in terms of length of survey, but we explored biometrics, voice technology, and adaptive media content. And for each of those, we asked questions around usage, perceived benefits, concerns, what would make people feel more comfortable, etc. And then also so that we could split the data in lots of different ways, we asked a series of demographic questions as well. So that included age, gender, region, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, disability, and use of assistive tech. So to dive into the findings from that, firstly I wanted to just talk a little bit about people's feelings around current and future use of AI. So people were asked to rate their feelings both from what impact they think AI is currently having on society, from 0 to 10, where 0 is extremely negative, 10 is extremely positive, and also thinking about the future use of AI and usage and impact on society. And what we found, so this is looking at all respondents, so both disabled and non-disabled, people were pretty bang in the middle on average. So we're looking there at a mean average of, sorry, I don't know why it keeps doing that, 5.41 for current usage and 5.17 for future usage. But what's actually, I think, the most interesting about this is that if we split that out now between disabled and non-disabled people, is that we find that that average does vary slightly. So on a scale, again, of 0 to 10, the mean average for disabled people was 5.11. Sorry, these notes on my screen are very small. And for non-disabled, it was 5.6. So that's a seemingly quite a small difference, but it is statistically significant. So from that, we know that disabled people feel more negatively towards the current use of AI in comparison to non-disabled people. And that finding is also reflected in this chart here, which shows a significantly higher proportion of non-disabled people feeling positive about the current use of AI. And this kind of, also is represented when thinking about future use. So again, on that scale from 0 to 10, the mean average score from the disabled respondents was 4.89, and from non-disabled respondents it was 5.35. So again, showing a significant difference there, and again showing that disabled people are more pessimistic about the future use and impact of AI in comparison to non-disabled. And again, that's further reflected in this chart here, which these differences in percentages aren't statistically significant, but it does continue to illustrate that finding that those without a disability are more optimistic than those with a disability. And then for each of the specific use cases that we explored, we asked people how beneficial they found that use case of AI on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not at all beneficial, 5 being extremely beneficial. And we also asked them how concerned they were about that use case. So again, from 1 being not at all concerned to 5 being extremely concerned. And that allowed us to calculate a net benefit score. So we took the mean average from the benefit rating and then subtracted the mean average from the concern rating. And that gave us these scores for each use case. So for biometrics, 0.72, voice technology, 0.72, 0.61 and adaptive media 0.57. And that's all just to say that because those numbers are above 0, basically, that overall people found them more beneficial than concerning. When looking at the mean averages for both benefit and concern across the use cases, there wasn't a statistically significant difference between disabled and non-disabled groups. But what there was what I will talk about next. There was a difference when we asked people to say, okay, what benefits do you see in this use case? What concerns do you see in this use case? Disabled people were more likely to select several of the concerns in comparison to non-disabled. So that's what I will talk you through next. So in terms of biometrics and the benefits identified there, the key benefit identified was that the technology will allow people to carry out tasks faster and more easily. But this was a benefit that was identified by significantly more non-disabled people than disabled people. When thinking about the concerns that people had around biometrics, the concerns often related around onus of responsibility, data protection and ease of use. And disabled people were significantly more likely to be concerned by things like, if the technology makes a mistake, it will be difficult to know who is responsible, and the technology will be less effective for some people. Biometrics was also the only use case where there was a significant difference between disabled and non-disabled respondents regarding attitudes to the increased usage of biometrics in the future and what that would mean for society. So again, using that same scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is extremely pessimistic and 10 being extremely optimistic, mean average for disabled respondents was 5.14, and for non-disabled it was 5.89. Again, seemingly small, but significant, which shows us that disabled people are more pessimistic about the increased usage of AI going forward. And this again is reflected in this chart, which shows that, yeah, these numbers, both on the net negative and net positive side, are statistically significant. And so, yeah, shows that a higher proportion of disabled people think it will have a negative impact in comparison to those without a disability. So then we asked people about, okay, what would make you feel more comfortable with biometrics? And across all 3 use cases, the top 3 remained the same. So that was security of personal information, more or improved security of personal information, more or improved information about how AI is being used, and more or improved laws. Again, we saw with certain mitigations far more disabled respondents selecting them versus non-disabled. So in the case of biometrics, more disabled people selected that they wanted more improved information about how AI is being used, more or improved laws, and more improved industry or cross-sector regulation. So now moving on to our second use case, which is around voice technology. These are the perceived benefits of that particular use case of AI, and the key one here is that the technology will allow people with difficulty using devices to access features and information more easily. Between all of them, there was no significant difference between disabled and non-disabled groups. Not the case when we look at the concerns. And again, we see the same pattern emerging with disabled respondents being more likely to select the following as concerns. So concerns about gathering personal information from which that could be shared with third parties, voice technology won't always work, and that the voice technology will be less effective for some groups. Again, when asking, okay, what would make you feel more comfortable with voice technology, we saw significantly more disabled people saying that they wanted more improved security of personal information, more improved information about how AI is being used, more improved laws, as well as more improved industry or cross-sector regulation. And more improved explanation of how AI decisions are being made. So then moving on to our final use case, which is around AI adapted digital media. The key benefit identified for this use case was that the technology will allow greater access to media, content and information. Again, no significant difference between disabled and non-disabled respondents here. But again, when looking at concerns, the perceived concerns identified more frequently by disabled people included that it will lead to job cuts and that some people will find it difficult to use the technology. And then finally, looking at the mitigations that people want put in place for AI digital media content to make them feel more comfortable, we saw significantly more disabled people select 4 different mitigations, and they were more improved security for personal information, more improved information about how AI is being used, more improved laws, and more improved monitoring to check for discrimination. So it's imperative that we ensure that disabled people aren't left behind in the world of AI technology. This means being intentional about how we design, create, regulate AI, and that's all things that Christine's going to talk about shortly. But it's also about making sure that usage of AI is equitable and that disabled people feel just as comfortable using AI in comparison to non-disabled people. So thinking about what I just showed you in terms of disabled people holding more particular concerns or wanting more mitigations to be put in place in order to feel comfortable, in order to ensure that AI is truly equitable, the industry really needs to seriously consider how it's going to address those concerns and how it's going to implement those mitigations. Because it's not just a kind of an attitudinal, like, wider society problem, it's not even a technology problem, this is also a disability inclusion problem as well.
Experts bring this really efficient, very, very rich set of insights that we were then able to support that consumer research with. I'm not going to expect that you can read this, but we will be sharing this publicly as well to say we had the most beautiful group of experts that I think we originally wrote a list of, what was it, 50 or 60 people that we thought we might like to interview. We never got past about 30 because thanks to those that came, pretty well everyone said yes, and if they said no, it's like, I'm sorry I can't come, but could my colleague come in place? So we had this beautiful group of people across different countries, across different backgrounds, whether it's academic, people that are entrepreneurially using AI for disability inclusive design, people that are working at the forefront of policy and really debating the regulations, rules and guidelines, people who are working with really specific subgroups like Michal, who works with older population, and people working in different environments. So, from Africa, where Christopher Harrison's focusing most of the work that he does, Canada, USA, UK and Australia all represented in the communities, and Switzerland. And same in the one-on-one interviews. These actually just were a really important addition that allowed us to bring people in that couldn't meet a particular time, partly because we have people so spread across the world we could never get a time that would work for everyone, but also just making sure that some people it was easier to do a one-on-one rather than a group session, and this just worked better for them. So in short, we're at a critical juncture. That is the summary of this whole expert section. This is the time, and there is no delaying. So I really, if there's nothing else you remember from today, and there's a lot of information, a lot of really beautiful quotes and so on, now is the time that we all need to lean forward. Because this is the moment at which it is not the start of AI. We're hearing from Adrian's been involved in AI, and so as has the University of Surrey for 40 years. I did my first AI project back in 1996. It's not new. People are talking about it as if it's new, but we can't start at the beginning, as Lisa Liskovoy eloquently says later. But the acceleration now is remarkable. It is moving into so many use cases and sitting underneath so much capability in society, increasingly so. If we don't step in now, we'll be catching tails for decades to come. So now is the moment. What did we find? This is the summary. So kind of if you're feeling sleepy, this is the moment to stay awake, and then from here we'll actually evidence these points. But here is the moment to stay awake, which is there are concerns, And the concerns absolutely matched and mapped really well to the concerns that came from the consumer research, which is first and foremost privacy and security. And particularly thinking about privacy and security from a disability-led perspective, what does that mean in trade-offs if you need efficiency and cost as well? Society biases. We are not working in a neutral zone. We are working in a very biased society that has a lot of that embedded in reality. So that is that reality amplified. And then there is data bias, which is our data sets do not reflect our reality, and our reality does not reflect necessarily the society we want. So there's these layers of bias that by the time you're applying AI, there are multiple layers of this impacting the outcomes of any solution. We'll also talk about the power of the creator and who is and who isn't creating. Also the power of AI to potentially help challenge and change that. Asymmetric implications, that is unbalanced knowledge, unbalanced power, and unbalanced benefits and costs. Left behind and explicit harm. So who is left behind? Because people are just not taking the care. And who is being deliberately exploited, and that there is actually intentional harm. And really, when we're thinking about guardrails and guidelines, actually Sarah Basson, one of Christopher's colleagues, has a beautiful quote to come. Secondly, opportunities. This is not just, that's a lot of negative, but this is powerful technology. And powerful technology can solve for unmet needs today in society in powerful ways. So how do we use and leverage these technologies that are coming through in really positively powerful ways to actually create the sort of society that we wish we had today? And some of the things that actually Henny came and spoke at the sessions on assistive technology and the power of AI to enable assistive technologies in increasingly adaptive, low cost and effective ways. Reducing barriers, but also increasing agency and independence, and most specifically doing that efficiently and cost effectively. We also talk about AI creating accessible environments, so actually using AI to empower accessibility at a faster rate than humans are doing that today. Using AI plus to impact physical spaces, and in fact one of the people in our roundtable, Pinar Guvenk, who is an inclusive designer, spoke beautifully about how AI and robotics or alternate interfaces or smart home spaces, we can actually get into physical accessibility and start to address it more powerfully. And then advanced personalisation, which we've talked about, particularly in the digital media space, how advanced personalisation can really enable people to interface in the way they wish, access content that they would like, and in a style and approach that suits them. And of course, what are the inclusion needs around this? So this is if they're the concerns and opportunities, how to? And some of the how-to, awareness and education, this session here today, sharing some of the love, sharing the knowledge, making sure that these doctoral candidates, when they go out, are informed, but actually also, we often talk about humility and audacity. They know what they don't know as much as they know what they know. And a big part of the course we've been doing is helping them know what they don't know, noticing the blank spaces in the work that they're doing. Inclusive engagement throughout the AI ecosystem comes through and through. This is critical. Being aware of who is and isn't in different rooms that are creating technologies, choosing technologies, applying technologies, or even measuring and monitoring them. Governance as part of the measuring and monitoring. As a researcher, I'm really focused on this inclusive data sets. I am deeply concerned by the level of exclusion in research today and in the data sets that we have. And deeply concerned not just by the data, but the correlation of that data to human needs, and therefore what we understand and don't understand, even to be able to address this. And outcome monitoring and consequence assessment, we're not going to catch everything on the way, so how do we actually monitor and manage what's coming out as an outcome, thinking of that particularly in an equity-based perspective, so that we can catch it at least as it's coming out and starting to address it. So this first concern, privacy and security, we've talked about it from the consumer perspective, but the trade-offs of higher for disabled people. So when efficiency is on offer, what privacy would you give away? We've seen this for the whole time Open has been operating in things as obvious as banking. It's not just in digital spaces where people will give their card to someone and say, could you get some money out of the world? People take much higher risks when the barriers are much higher in order to have independence and agency. That's not okay. It is time for us to really actively address this, and technology can allow us to do that. Information on others, and we'll hear from one of our experts on that in how people can use information with the use case of assistive technology potentially to implicate other people's privacy. So computer vision is the obvious use case here, where someone with sight loss might like to use computer vision to be able to see a space, but what are they picking up in the interim? Access needs are marginalised characteristics that could be determined by AI, so people not choosing to share their needs but having technology share it on their behalf without their permissions. And the Trojan horse risks of disability use cases to actually get more privacy barriers down, because we can say, oh, but it's really useful over here for this small community, this community or this use case, and actually using that to potentially set up for greater failure that everyone will be implicated by. So some of the bits to bring this to life. Let me just start by sharing a video from Ariel Silverman, who's the Director of Research for the American Foundation for the Blind.
A lot about image description AI, and there's some new image description apps that have come out very recently. But it requires a person to take a photo of someone or something and have it uploaded into the cloud. People might not want to be photographed without their consent and have their photos described by AI. There's been a lot of controversy about whether or not the AI should be able to describe people, whether it should be able to recognize people by name or be trained to do that, whether it should try to attribute or try to estimate a person's age, race, or gender, because of course sometimes it might not get that right. With some blind people believing that they should have access to the same information that sighted people have access to, and that censoring that information is in itself ableist. And then others, recognizing that there are legitimate privacy concerns about people being photographed or described or named by an AI, and there are also concerns about people being misgendered or being attributed the wrong age or the wrong race. So those are some really big questions that have been discussed in the blind world and in our expert panel.
So as you're going to hear, this is complex. There are trade-offs, and there is going to be some really important conversations to be had. We need to think about who is in that room, and definitely people with sight loss need to be in that room, and people who the consequences of potentially having that privacy taken away from them also need to be in that room. A really lovely quote from Levon Roberts as well around large language models replicating human beings, and there's many pieces to that. So how do you capture their humanity? How do you protect it? What happens after they pass away? Who's in charge of the data? So in this case, she's actually working on language, a language communication tool using AI, where people are using their current voice as they're losing their voice, so that they can continue to communicate with those loved ones around them with their voice. But there's all that information. What happens to that data, and who's protecting that, and who's managing that? The other one, Uni Walker, talks about how governments have actually used AI technologies to try and determine people's disability, and then to impact their social welfare benefits on the basis of that. So actually using it in a really quite corrosive way, because it does make mistakes. And in fact, Australia had a particularly poor case of this that we'll hear of from one of the women that was very closely associated at the time. The next one is the biases in data and in reality. So recognising this double layer of our reality is biased and our data further biases what we can see through data. Also, we're not going to touch on it too much, but synthetic data, and there's a lot of discussion around at the moment about clean data and dirty data. Let's call synthetic data what it is: fake data. And if you take today's data and then you create fake data from it, and that you think about that that's now going to close the loop and create good insights that you can use, you've just muddied the water to be able to actually see anything at all. So synthetic data, particularly in the research world, I think is a critically important conversation that we should be having. I'm just going to play a video here from Susan Scott Parker about the impact of biases in society, and she talks about both the current biases but also the AI implicated biases.
A young man in the UK trying to get a job with Deliveroo, just a very basic job, delivering groceries. He was required to send in his application on his phone, and he was required to take his photograph 3 times. But the technology refused to acknowledge that because he has a disfigured face, he had a face at all. And so all the work that's been done on facial recognition relating to ethnic minorities, for example, nothing to be done about people who don't often even describe themselves as having a disability. He may well have preferred to identify as someone with a facial difference. The point is, he's unemployed. And, and the developers would argue that, well, you shouldn't expect more from an AI tool than you do from a human being, and human beings are prejudiced and discriminate. But my argument, of course, back is you might get lucky and find a human recruiter with an open mind, but you'll never get lucky if Deliveroo insists that you send your 3 photos in. It is bedded into the system.
And I think, a similar quote there from Ariel Silverman where she talks about, the AI and eye contact. And, we had a number of use cases actually around eye contact. And again, this one's an employment one where the way people use eye contact can be seen to, show reliability. Now, for someone who's got sight loss or is on the autism spectrum, eye contact might be atypical, and therefore they don't get the equal opportunity for that role. That might have nothing to do with eye contact in the role itself. And Sarah Basson, I love this quote, so I'll just read it directly from Sarah, which is about implication and really understanding consequence and thinking first through that lens. I think we've talked about the potential areas of bias, and so it's the data and the model development, it's the evaluation. So just to be aware, of these potential areas of bias, and then also to identify the level of risk. What is the risk? Financial? Is it social? Is it life-threatening, for somebody with a disability? And just keep that in mind when what is the cost of an error here? And I think the EU has actually done a really good piece of work in thinking that through and actually starting to think about guardrails, guidelines and rules on this basis of what is the implication of getting this wrong, because we know that technology will get things wrong. Also, just, again, some of the concerns on biases in the outcomes and how outcomes can be significantly impacted. We'll just hear from Yona here in terms of health outcomes.
If we're trying to go with the unsupervised learning, we already have the historical complexity, which full of disparities, which full of injustice. And for instance, when we try to use AI for a DNA data clustering for medical solutions, it's predominantly not efficient for smaller groups. And not only disabilities, but any smaller groups. Because, for instance, even gender-wise, city and urban data sets were historically gender blind, and many medical tests were done without women or without particular groups. So it was focused on general population.
And I think this is a really interesting use case because particular areas of society like medicine, we see that there is this overrepresentation and underrepresentation of different communities, and therefore better understanding and poorer understanding of how this might be applied. And as we're seeing quite a lot of push to use AI in medicine at the moment, with very stretched health resources. But the consequence of that will fall on groups that are marginalised in data and marginalised in the understanding behind that as well. This discussion, again from Ariel, around disability as a non-average characteristic, and AI is trained on averages. Tricia Wong has talked beautifully, in fact presciently back in 2013, about big data and thick data. If you have big data, the very nature of getting data ready for AI strips back a lot of the context of it and actually averages a lot of stuff that when you de-average it, you get the real meaning, and that's that thick data, that understanding, that why, that who, that particular characteristic or context relevant in that circumstance. So big data, which everyone's so excited by at the moment, stripped bare of thick data, is very at risk. On the positives, we've had a lot of negatives, but there is some real excitements here in the disability community and the experts that are working in this space around the ability of AI to micro-personalise content, interfaces and style, as Adrian was talking about before, robotics and connected tech to really address some of the physical challenges that we've got in spaces today, and more adaptive assistive technology, also just people being able to use atypical language and communicate more efficiently, as we were hearing from Livonne with the work she's doing, people as they're losing language, being able to connect and communicate with their families using their own voice for a lot longer. So some really powerful technologies. So let me just play one that I love from Greg, because this one addresses one of the other challenges, which is how do you get more people in the system throughout?
One way is people with physical disabilities, et cetera, who can't code quickly. It will do so much, if I call first pass coding and recoding and rewriting. You can write it, it does something, and you say, oh, it does this, but could you change every place that it does this to do that? And bingo, it does the whole thing, things that would take an hour or more. And so this is nice because people who don't have 10 flying fingers and who can't compete, now it no longer matters how fast your fingers fly, it's how well you think.
If you think about opportunities in employment for people that have been really excluded from these opportunities through poor efficiency because of the kinds of technologies and the kinds of environments that we work in, there is such opportunity for AI to address those inefficiencies that are just human environment mismatches. So I'm really excited by some of the potential there. Equally, Kate Kuzovich from Fabletech, and she's also an AI board member on the Canadian Accessibility Standards, just talked about it in practice. As someone who herself is deaf, not just having captioning and transcripts for the speakers, as we're running here today, but also for everyone at the table. So the tables around conferences, so just making that event space so much more accessible and inclusive of everyone. And it being such low cost. When I first came into the space, we would never do an event like this without having an STTR reporter. So someone actually typing and putting the captions on screen. We're now using AI captions for this. And they're not bad, even with my bad Australian accent. The other one is cost, and this is really critically important for the disability community because there is underemployment and there is an increasing level of poverty across the community. Making sure that we don't have this additional burden of expensive technology simply to get the same capability as people without. And this one I loved, which is Livonne talking about Aaron's avatar, the technology she's building. The first one cost $25,000 to make. We now give an avatar to someone basically at no cost. That is incredible. So what does this mean for inclusion needs? What does this mean we can do with this knowledge to create an environment where more inclusive AI is more possible and more exclusionary use of AI and equitable outcomes is less likely? Let's first hear from Kate and Yona, both of whom work in the policy space, about policy.
Some countries are doing a good job of at least trying to keep up. And hopefully they'll set the standards that others will follow as well, that this is important, this is meaningful work, you can't wait. One of the benefits about transparency and publishing things and doing work out in the open is that others can learn from you.
Finally, we have so-called regulatory sandboxes where government will help to build AI models, provide the knowledge, provide these capabilities, both from opportunity to innovate more, but also innovate in a responsible way. And the rules will be more clear because before, once again, it was kind of the black box. So we only could learn then something bad is happening, like I mentioned, the screening of data from social media. Now, finally, they have these rules. We have a taxonomies of technologies. We have these digital frameworks, AI frameworks. We have a growing community. So hopefully good things are coming.
I love that. Hopefully good things are coming. But a number of the key things there, transparency, working in the open so other people can learn from it, but also working safely. So, Yona was talking about sandboxes. So releasing in sensible layers, not just throwing things out there. I'm a bit conscious of time. So Lisa, this is the one we mentioned before where she said, we can't think about people with disabilities at the start as the start has already happened. So just that consciousness of there is no going back from here. We just need to go forward from here as effectively as we can. And actually, Jo has a beautiful but very personal story here, if you're happy for me to share that, Jo, that I think brings to life Sarah's comment before about consequence.
So I've got a son with autism, and they've just implemented a new reading assessment app within the class. And I can say it has been 100% dreadful. It, makes so many assumptions about how children read, how they answer questions, and none of them seem to apply to him. He was unable to take its assessment that would then level him onto where it was meant to be. So it put him onto the youngest age level. There was no controls for the teacher to correct it. All of his friends teased him. He was demoralized. It was just this desperately upsetting situation. This really worries me for the future, that all of the hype around the personalization doesn't necessarily actually work for everyone. Like someone was saying, it just pulls everyone into the mean. And I think that there's just such an enormous risk of that, and that then excluding people from very foundational services like education.
Age, stage, and implication at education. I mean, this is what we can do to harm people if we're not considering atypical ways of learning or atypical ways of communicating or atypical ways of anything that we do. And every human moves, sense, thinks and feels and communicates differently. So we're going to fail all of humanity by doing this in some way. And I think the last one here, in terms of inclusion needs, second last one, this is the how-to, and this is the co-design. This is bringing people into the ecosystem and working right across the ecosystem with really diverse perspectives and needs. And this is where we've really focused our teaching out at the Centre for Doctoral Training, is thinking about how at every single stage from where might we solve a problem, what problem might be useful to solve, right through to monitoring the outcomes and implications of it. So firstly, how close is the creator to the user? And I'd love to bring Lavonne's voice into this.
I think there's an entire disconnect. It's something I'm very passionate about that I go around speaking around a lot. You have engineers working in isolation in labs who are designing algorithms. They do not have people in there. At best, there might be an introduction in a situation like this. So to be able to take an engineer into the home with the family members, to get to know people, to understand what their life looks like, to get to know the person, I think that's definitely really, really key.
This is Marie Johnson, who is an Australian innovator using AI, avatars and digital assistants for people with disabilities, and talking about that standardisation trade-off with personalisation and localisation, which I think is also really important here.
With the digital human cardiac coach, and we did a co-design very similar with one of the hospitals there in Wilmington. The local words that Australia would use for different foods, completely different to the words that African American communities would use in Wilmington, North Carolina. So even though the corpus, in this case for cardiac care, is the same the world around, localization is necessary to take into account people's context. It also means that by doing it that way, you can scale quicker. Okay, so the standardization means that you can maybe roll out to the 60 or 70%. And then the localization means you can then take into account other communities without having to redo the whole thing.
Interestingly, that characteristics and context, it's not just characteristics which we're talking about in terms of disability or any other marginalised characteristic, but also that really important context of where people are, what their language is, what the terms are. And in fact, they did some really interesting work in Australia around a social service support called Nadia, the technology, where the Aboriginal, Australian First Peoples community have very, very different language around the topic. So they were talking about how they might just ensure the language made people feel this was a tool for them. And lastly, let's think about some of the underlying drivers for good and poor decisions. I think the first one, in terms of good decisions, where's the money? Who's getting the money? There is so much money flowing into AI. How much of that is flowing into disability inclusive AI? How much of that is flowing into really addressing equity considerations more broadly, whether it's disability or any other marginalised characteristic or context? So, this quote from Ira Abraham, who's an innovator in this space and herself a tech entrepreneur using AI, particularly to address people with who are hard of hearing or deaf. I'm in the startup ecosystem. I often don't see the conversation around disability inclusion in AI. If you were to look at any startup event that are happening and new emerging ideas and investment opportunities associated with AI, there is no attachment for disability inclusion in that. I think it's a bit concerning given that there's an influx of investment going into AI without having disability inclusion at the forefront in the decision making of the product and technology. I think it's big. I think it's concerning. And the last one, the consequences. And I won't go into this in detail, but essentially this is Mary talking about the consequences of robo-debt, which do read up on it if you would like, but it is a tragic story of AI going wrong. And I use the word tragic in reality because it created quite a lot of suicides. People lost their homes, but it actually was a desperately poor use of AI to essentially create fake debt or projected debt to give people that, using AI to project possible, not real, and then to change the burden of proof on the individual, not the government, to say that you didn't have it as opposed to you did. And then, of course, people with additional friction and difficulty in their life anyway, and just navigating a bureaucratic process. This created an absolutely disastrous outcome. So there are some powerful ways we can learn, and please, so we can not replicate these in the future. There's some really good positives there, but there's also quite hard-hitting messages there, and I don't want to leave anyone without, what can I do? We said at the beginning, this today is about this critical juncture where we need everyone to lean forward. So we've broken this down into a few really practical things that we hope everyone can get something from today, that you can walk out of that room and change what you do tomorrow on the basis of. First up, if you're a policymaker or influence policy, Yona's comment, work in the open, build on the work of others, monitor and evaluate outcomes for equity, and create safe learning and collaboration environments. Give space for this to happen, give safety for this to happen, give transparency for others to build on the work that you're doing. If you're procuring AI systems, if you're thinking about, is this a place that AI might be able to be embedded to create greater efficiencies or better outcomes for the work we're doing, consider who was involved in designing, making or testing the product. Ask and get an answer to what has been done to test for and remove bias risks in this. Make sure that you know how inclusive were the underlying data and training sets that we used. And what commitments will the supplier make, the seller make, about product safety. And actually, Susan Scott Parker's interview was just really powerful in this. I can really recommend Disability Ethical AI as a website if you'd like to know more in the procurement space. If you're a designer, creator of AI systems, or involved just in that creation ecosystem anywhere, who in the team was informing the solution? And critically, who isn't? No team can represent 1.3 billion disabled people, let alone however many, 7 billion, 8 billion, what's the planet up to today? But recognising who isn't there and being really conscious of that, and therefore designing your research and designing your other elements around that. What is and isn't in the data set, being critical about data. We all need to get really literate in data today and help others get literate. And that's why I'm so excited by the doctoral program. It's how do we help more people who are technologists really understand data in a more human way. Who's going to benefit most and who might not benefit equally? This is an asymmetric benefit and cost. And this can drive some really poor outcomes in a highly distorted ownership market as we have today. And even just yesterday I was reading a Medium article on this influx of synthetic data, meaning that the training data that's available to anyone coming in now it's going to make it harder and harder for anyone to compete with the initial behemoths like the organisation we're in, but those that came in early have cleaner data. And that means there's a very, very limited group of organisations and individuals at the centre of this. So being really conscious of that. What are the potential risks or unintended consequences of the use or misuse? So really thinking through, as Sarah cautioned us, thinking through what could happen and putting your black hat on for a while, not just getting excited by the positives that could come with it. Starting at the edges, we've been saying this for years, start at the edges. Rama's famous for this, start at the edges, you get the centre for free. When you ask people who have really differentiated characteristics, you just get more insight for the same effort. Learn from and solve for those with really differentiated needs. Share power. This is not just about engagement, this is about genuine co-creation, not just who was in the room, but who had power to decide. And test and assess, release and monitor, and limit the use while there's limited understanding. So thinking about the sandbox, the pilot, the small scale, and the slowly rolling it out as knowledge comes in so that the consequences can be managed and mitigated as well. And this one for anyone who wasn't in that group, if anyone's a human in the room, any human in the room, please get curious. Please ask and learn. This is our time as humans to determine our fate and our future and our society. Be critical. Fact check. Don't do the easy route because it's so easy to get answers now, but get critical around the hype and the claims. Consider who's going to benefit and who takes risks of costs and risks and costs. That really helps the being critical. Be transparent. This is on all of us. Own up to whether you use AI in the work that you're doing and be proud of where you've used it because hopefully you made that decision ethically and you'll choose to. We're using AI in captions, but we didn't use it in analysing this data. We used humans in that. Use your privilege and make space for those with less because all of us have privilege. And in this room, by the very nature of you're in the room, you have enormous privilege. So, recognise that privilege and make space for those with less. And speak up and use that when you know something's wrong because we will see stuff that is wrong. And it's coming at us now, but it's going to increasingly do so. And dig deeper if you're unsure. Don't go quiet. Dig deeper and find out. Consider data flows, especially your own data. Be really proactive about your own data management. Consider impact and value flows and think about how they're transforming outcomes. And share what you're learning because none of us can keep up. This is why I love working at the university because we can't possibly stay at the edge of this. But if all of us are working in our different edges and sharing what we're seeing there, we can learn so much better together. This one I borrowed from you, Rama. This was from a session that you ran, and I've seen it before, but I just thought it was a lovely way to end, which is technology is too important to leave to the technologists. And please, if you're a technologist, don't let this disempower you. This empowers you because you're there and you have that power. But actually, we need everybody involved in this. We need, whether that's your day job, whether that's as a parent, whether that's as a teacher, whether that's as a friend of someone. We all need to use our influence in positive ways. And I know that actually with AI, and I say I know because I feel this, it can feel technical as a non-technician. It can feel scary, especially when we talk about disability and inclusion and AI, especially in today's world, not 2 weeks ago's world. This is a space that we're all going to be uncomfortable in, but we all need to step into with as much confidence and as much care and as much kindness as we can for each other and for ourselves so that we can progress and use the power of this tool in a positively powerful way. Thank you. I'd love to bring two of my colleagues who have been teaching at the program from October to December, Anna and Brendan, to come and talk about their perspectives, both as professionals teaching in this space.
As someone who doesn't just work in technology as it pertains to disability, also one of my big areas of work is emergency response, disaster response, that is inclusive of disabled people. And having seen the impact of the LA fires specifically on disabled people, which is a really climate-driven disaster, it's made me think a lot about the value of resources and prioritizing how much we are willing to use, and thinking a lot about what I was using these tools for and saying, I don't think it's worth that sort of burden on the environment and on my community in this admittedly really indirect way, but a really urgent way nonetheless, given that disabled people are 2 to 4 times more likely to die or be critically injured in the event of a disaster, especially a climate-driven disaster. So I think a lot about AI in terms of other disability issues in the community. Second, I've been thinking a lot about this new digital divide that Christine and Michelle talked quite a bit about, which is that, you know, you invent these really amazing pieces of technology, but you also then invent exclusion for the people who can't use them. And I was recently at a large round table of disabled people where we are asking for reflections on AI. What are you excited about? What are you afraid of? And this was a group of disabled people who the only thing that we all had in common was we all have a care package. So on a daily basis or a weekly basis, we need a care assistant to come into our homes and help us with certain things. And the thing that most surprised me about that, you know, I found the same things that this amazing piece of research found, was that a lot of these people have no idea what AI is. The group I was leading, we were split into a few groups, specifically said, oh, well, I'd really like to have more of the doors in my house open automatically, with like a button to open them. And to them, that was the same as AI, the fact that you could use electricity to help you do a function that you can't do with just your physical strength. So I think there's a lot to be said about plain language and accessible resources to understand AI, to take advantage of it in the ways that we do value and do think are worth the resource use, in order to prevent and shrink that digital divide. And the third thing, privacy and coercion, which is something that was covered really well in this piece of research. Here in London, so just in our backyard, there are disabled people who are being given tools like a voice assistant, whether that's, I think most of them are the Amazon Echo, but some people are getting the Hey Google tool, and being told that this will replace their in-home care and having those care services cut. Specifically I heard just a few days ago about a woman whose local council who provided her care package saying, oh, we're taking away your overnight carer who helps you get out of bed when you're in a position where you really can't get out yourself, because we're giving you this tool that will recognize your voice when you need to call for help. And then it can call someone who's maybe across London who can come in an hour if you're lucky. So thinking about ways in which this technology can be used to coerce people into making decisions that aren't in their best interest, ways to reduce people's support rather than increase that support. Because I think many of these tools have such potential to create safer ways of living, increase redundancy of support, and instead they're creating more precarity for some of the most vulnerable and most marginalized in our community. So I often find myself thinking very negatively about what I see recently with respect to the intersection of AI and disability. But one thing that has definitely brought me back from the brink a little bit is the Center for Digital Language Inclusion, which is an initiative funded by Google's philanthropic arm in partnership with the Global Disability Innovation Hub, that's using AI to recognize non-standard speech for people with speech impairments of all kinds. And not only in English, but in, I believe, 10 African languages, which are being recorded as over the next couple months in Kenya, Ghana, and Nigeria. And it's just such an amazing program and project to give people access to communication, especially in a way that is not Western-centric, not non-disabled-centric. And it's just a perfect show of the very real potential that AI has to materially improve the lives of disabled people. And I hope we get to see much more of that. On to you.
Anna, Your Honour, I am guilty as charged on multiple counts because I do use Gemini and Perplexity and ChatGPT. And I was trying to figure out when we were thinking through before this session, where would I rate myself on a scale of 1 to 10, especially listening to the research and the very deep insights that came through in the interviews that Christine shared. So let's say 1 is AI is a disaster. It's nothing but bad. It's not going to do anything except exclude and make exclusion worse. I'm not at a 1. And what about a 10? You know, it's going to save all our lives from exclusion. We're going to be all happy. And I'm stuck because I'm at a 4 and I'm at a 6. And that doesn't equal 5. I'm just not happy with 5. Why am I at a 6? I'm at a 6 because of the radical difference these tools are making to my life. So as someone with progressive sight loss who happens to love reading and writing and has to do both as part of my job, the efficiency gain that I have in my daily life is dramatic. I was reviewing business plans for an entrepreneurship course in Dublin for people with disabilities, a task that I would have to labor over with PDFs, 20 pages each one, not accessible PDFs. How do I read them? How do I take notes in real time and then package that into meaningful, personalized feedback? You know, I'm not someone who just wants to stamp an A on the grade sheet. So with AI, I can speed read it faster than anyone sighted can, thanks to Speechify. And I can simultaneously take my abbreviated notes and my shorthand that only I understand at the same time, and then set up a routine in one of the AI tools based on my templates from before, feed it in, and out pops exactly what I want to give the student. And of course, reviewing it to make sure it's personalized and not kind of disappeared off into God knows what. But that's just an example of a task that for me would have taken many, many hours is down to less than an hour. It's down to half an hour, even less, 15 minutes. That's a radical change to my life in terms of getting rid of something I called a blind tax. So all of these points of exclusion, whether it's interacting with just day-to-day tasks in my job, interacting with my bank, interacting with my television, with my washing machine, with my Irish airline app that I won't mention is atrocious. All those things that cost more time, more energy, more money, confidence, self-worth, belief in humanity. All of those things are a cost to me, a cost to each of us who encounter them day to day. I call it blind tax in my life. I pay blind tax every day. There's a tax on blindness. It costs money, it hurts. And for a tool to come along, like a blind tax credit, is astonishing. It is unbelievable. So that's where I'm at a 6, because I see many of these tools like a blind tax credit. They are offsetting the pain, the cost, the hurt that day-to-day systemic exclusion is causing me, and for many of us in the disabled community. Why a 4 though? And this is the other side of the story. I see a shadow. I see that shadow that we live under, all that prejudice, the bias, the shortcuts, you know, the laziness, the ignorance, the quick ways out. We see them in products, services, environments, designs. We see them everywhere. And that's been created by humanity, us. And there's a shadow. Now, imagine if AI comes along as a tool and you said to me, Brenda, don't worry, it's going to be more accurate insights and more human than ever before. I would see that shadow starting to lessen, start to lessen. If you could tell me that AI could be more human and more accurate, I think we're getting somewhere in breaking down that shadow, breaking down the exclusion. Now, unfortunately for AI, there are two things it's not very good at: accurate insight, human emotion. And that's why I'm stuck on the 4 when it comes to thinking about AI. I fear the shadow gets darker because, as Christine was mentioning earlier, the less accurate the insight, when we lose the context, when we lose all those circumstantial things, what I'm getting back from these AI tools may not be all that accurate. Certainly not human. If you had seen some of the feedback it was giving me from my students, I would never put that, you know, in someone's feedback. And that for me is really the stuck place between the 4 and the 6. On the one hand, I love it because it's changing my life. On the other hand, I'm worried because unless we intentionally use the tool to lighten the shadow, unless we make sure that the insights are going to be more accurate and that somehow we can make it more emotionally aware, then it's only going to make the shadow worse. And that's why I worry about it. And just to wrap up, like thinking back to what Anna was saying about climate, I do think about the big picture, sort of beyond Brendan and his boring day-to-day work and beyond their micro level. What are our biggest challenges as a planet, as a civilization? We need lower temperatures. We need less inequality. We need less isolation. So when I think of AI at the macro level, how can AI be used as a tool in a way that lowers temperatures, not increases them? Back to the many gallons of water I've already wasted through my efficiency play. How can it lower inequality? We've talked a lot about that today in what Christine and Adrian and the team have shared. And how can it lower isolation? Because if I'm going to, like the excellent example Anna gave, if I'm just going to interact with a machine, with an artificial intelligence, and not with a person, what's going to happen to our mental health crisis? So I would love to see the day, and that's my huge hope for the utopia of AI. Let's get using this tool to lighten the shadow, to lower temperatures, to lessen inequality, and to lower isolation.
We were talking about this on the train to our most recent visit to the CGT, and I think I compared it to the plastic straw kind of debacle. For those who are in the disability world, this will be familiar to you. Plastic straws have an environmental impact. They're plastic, they're single use, they go into the ocean, kill turtles, hate that. And so they were banned. But in the midst of the discussion of all these bans, a lot of disabled people said, well, actually, I can't drink without a straw. If I go to a restaurant and you give me a glass of water or you give me a pint, I can't have that without a plastic straw. It's an access tool. And I think about a lot of AI tools in a similar way, that for some people it is an access tool. I think you spoke about it really well, Brendan, and that's not a waste. It is a use of resource that I think we can all agree is really worth the resource. And maybe for other uses, not so much. If you're just, I don't know, creating images of dogs, or I don't know, you can find those on Google already, can you not? And so thinking just really critically about what should it be used for and not, and what is this use of critical resource for.
What's in a utopia for you?
Yeah.
If you could wave a magic wand.
I don't know. I think I'd like to see far more disabled people involved in the development of AI technology, because I think the ways I've seen you and several other disabled friends that I have, the ways that they've come up with to leverage the things already out there are just so clever. And one of my friends is using them to help create the rotas for his PAs, which is something that takes ages. You know, you're negotiating people's schedules and your schedules and figuring that out, and it's a job on top of the other job that you probably already have. And so for things like that, you know, that's excellent. And what more could those creative minds do? These people, these disabled people who were already so used to living in a world that wasn't built for us, that we think creatively and innovatively and use disability as a generative force. What could we do with all of this potential? So I'd like to see more disabled-led AI decision making. What about you, Brendan?
I think about your climate intersection because what I've noticed in the media recently with all the coverage about our focus in this country on AI, and it's going to be a big push, which is important. To not fall behind, I wonder how we can intersect that with the climate commitments we've already made. And I'd love to see how we could come up with a formula that keeps us under the 1.5, because I can't get that out of my head as I guzzle the water. What am I doing to make this heating climate worse? Because in the end, that just makes inequality worse. So how to intersect with climate, how to knit it into the UN process for that.
Say thank you to both of you.
All right.
So if you think about what we've heard today, and you think about, you know, the sorts of projects that you're doing, like Project Relate, that are very directly applying AI efficiently to solve very significant human problems today, what excites you, and what are you concerned about as we look forward, you know, for the next couple of years?
I'm afraid about the climate change now. No. What's really interesting to me is we're seeing more and more people have these kinds of conversations. We're seeing more large organizations be more thoughtful, more engaged, more inclusive in the process of designing, co-designing, co-creation. This is becoming part of just how we do our work. And this isn't just in terms of, say, Google Maps, but it's also in terms of our AI teams. Literally today, where we've been doing a hackathon on vision for people, on visual tools and AI, people are doing the kind of work that's necessary, being disabled-led, being disabled creative, and learning from the community about what's broken in this world that was not designed with us in mind. But then through that hustler attitude, what are the solutions that gets to be there? And so that process of co-collaboration is happening more and more, even in AI, at least at the larger companies. The smaller companies, there is always that concern. I mean, looking at this new DeepSeek, I forget the name of it. I don't know how inclusive they were in terms of the creation of the software. The more people who use that, the greater risk of these biases happen. So I'm comfortable in terms of where we are. Well, I'm never comfortable because all I see are the warts. But I think we're on the right path because we have a process that includes inclusion. And we always recognize that we are building a program as opposed to a product. We create a version, and then we create a new version, and a new version, and hopefully we make the things that need to be improved better. And we may make mistakes, and we'll fix those things too. But I do want to talk about one thing about this climate change, because I have this conversation with my 16-year-old daughter a lot, specifically about AI and the impact on the environment. But there's a technological aspect of things that can make these things better. It's when you do it on device. So if you think about the things that are happening on your phone, that doesn't require any data, and that doesn't require access to gallons of water for Brendan. For example, Android devices and some iPhones can create real-time captions on your device. that doesn't hit the internet. The captions here do, but they're very good. But it's because there's a compromise one has to think about. If you want it to be very good, you probably need that data center. If you want, but there's a latency tax to that as well. If you want to have it right now, you probably want to do it on device, less impact in terms of the environment, but it's probably going to be a little less accurate, but the latency will be better. So as we look at these technologies, always a compromise that you need to take into consideration. Accuracy and latency is an important one. Power justification, where does the power come from? That changes it as well. So as we move to a more AI-based future, I think one way to solve these problems is do more of these on device. An example is the Google Chrome browser can create real-time captions on any audio stream in your web browser. All you have to do is just turn it on in accessibility settings, which is really cool. And it also powers a refreshable braille display. And it doesn't require drinking any extra water. It all happens on your laptop. So the more of these technologies that are built to exist in your hand on your lap, the more people can be helped at less of a sacrifice for others.
I think it's really interesting, just picking up on your comment of how you're engaging with the disability community now, and also your caution that not everyone is. So as an organisation that has been a leader in disability inclusive innovation for a long time, how can you also, with the power you have in this space, put technologies out there potentially with guidelines or guardrails or suggestions, or here are the ways that we can use that generative force of disability in how you're doing it, but also save yourself from a lot of pain and negative outcomes of creating something that you didn't intend or an outcome that you didn't expect?
I think, so Google as a company, we've published our AI expectations, our values. We've published this and shared this globally because we got to hold ourselves accountable to these kinds of things and hope that is an example that other people can follow. We also need to realize that sometimes it's going to do the wrong thing. I think back of the time when we had our early generator and someone was able to create a picture of a black Nazi, something that probably wouldn't have happened. So you're going to make mistakes. And what do you do when you make a mistake? I think that's the value of a company that sees this as a process that you're in, as opposed to we just need to get out first and be the best. Best for whom? Based off of what metrics? If you want to be the fastest, okay, that's one thing. If you want to be the most accurate, that's another. If you want to be the most creative, that's another. And sometimes there's genius in the mistakes because it triggers your thoughts of how you want to do something better. So it is a matter of moving forward with intention, sharing what we want to do, and hope other people follow with us. Recognize that we're never going to be perfect. So how do you react to those things that happen? But finally, try to find ways where you can collaborate and bring people together. I think about the Accessible Speech Project was sort of the forerunner of what was happening with what's happening in Ghana. This is when Apple, Google, Microsoft, Meta, and others came together, and we brought together all of our data of non-typical speech patterns. So this is Project Euphonia, is what we've called it. All of us came together and gave it to a university in Illinois. They have this data now. They're actually driving the creation of more data and providing open access to it. So we can collaborate together, these big companies, where it makes sense to help us move the bar for everyone. And the DCLI is a great example happening in Africa. I love to see more and more of these things come together because the aggregation of data is expensive and difficult. The more we can do to bring inclusive data and make it easy to do the right thing, then I think we have the best chance of having the most inclusive products.
I think that lowering the cost of understanding difference and of getting data sets that are going to be more inclusive, and therefore whatever's applied over the top of it has access to that. You have access to a more complete data set is so critical. Particularly thinking about the fact that you're working in Africa, you're working across the MENA area as well as in Europe, for a company and for a technology that is really very North American centric. How does context feed into this as well? Because of course, not only do disabled people versus people without disabilities have different experiences, but a disabled person in Ghana is going to have a very different set of experiences than someone with the same access need here in the UK or West Coast US. So how, as an organisation that works right across these contexts, are you working in community, as I know you guys you are, to get that contextual support for the outcomes?
I think the most important thing, it takes intention to recognize that what was built in Mountain View, California may not have as much of impact as you would expect it to in Nairobi. It seems obvious to say, but in terms of practicality, a lot of people think if it's good enough for here, it's good enough for other places. They don't think about the intent, the cost of devices. They don't think about the easy access to the internet. So if you don't take those into consideration, you're never going to solve for that kind of problem. The second part of this, I think that's interesting, is culture is an important part of what makes AI relevant. We heard the conversation about localization. For me, I think about it one step higher. I think about internationalization, because it's not just language, but it's also culture. For example, if you go into EMEA, Middle East, North Africa, the term for people, what we call disabled people, people with disabilities, is people of determination. And this is completely legit and normal, and this is just what's used as common language. Other parts of the world will be quite offensive. So we can't take our own biases and judgment of what's okay there or what's okay here and apply it there, or vice versa. So we need to bring this cultural aspect into the technology that's being created. So we create something, if you're in Saudi, you make something that's relevant for someone in Saudi, but also something that's relevant here for someone in the UK. And it's going to be different, and it has to be different, because our peoples are different, our languages are different, but our cultural expectations is also different.
I think for one, last thing is, for someone who's been working at the kind of intersection of emerging technology and human diversity for most of your career, what's one thing you'd love to leave everyone with today to take with them that might be helpful in the way they think about this very fast-paced, what can feel quite intimidating space? And then, of course, human diversity that can be quite intimidating because we are so different from each other. You've always lent into those two levels of complexity. How do you do it, or what's one thing that you would suggest to people to be more comfortable getting uncomfortable?
I think you need to realize that it's really hard. Trying to solve technology at scale for people who have different individualized needs is very, very difficult. And it's going to take a long time to create the tools that make it easier and easier for everyone to do what they need to do. We're not going to be there tomorrow. We're not going to be there next year. We may never get there because people's expectations change. The requirements of what we need to do change. And there might be bugs in code. Things might go wrong. So we're never going to hit utopia. We're never going to hit nirvana, where everything is everything for everyone. We're going to try to do that, because that's what we have to do. So be patient, because it's going to take some time. Hold yourself and ourselves accountable, and call out where you see things that aren't right. Because sometimes if you're so busy in that drive, you may not have all of the ability to hear, because you're so focused on your target. But hopefully the people that you work with have the resources for you to feed that information of what needs to be fixed, and they have the opportunity to make these changes. So it's something that we get to do together. Be patient but impatient. And I know how stupid that sounds, but it's going to take time. But hold us accountable, and hold yourselves accountable too, because you're bringing your expertise into this as well. But this is something that we all get to do together, whether it's big tech, whether it's education, whether it's disability advocates and protests. It's all part of the process. We're all doing this together, and that's the only way it's going to work, is if we can do these things together.
Thank you for having us and sharing this space, but also your wisdom with us. I want to pass to the audience now and say, what concerns you? What questions come up?
Hello, I'm Angela from the AICDT and from the CoStar National Lab. I'm head of inclusion. In a way, you're preaching to the converted here today. Just before I arrived here, I was talking to another academic at another institution about how we start to embed sustainability and EDI in our access program, so with all the SMEs we're working with. And in a way, I think, we've got budget and hopefully motivation, certainly on this side of the pond, to do EDI, to do sustainability, to really think about how we embed these things. I think it's much harder for SMEs to find that space, both sort of mentally and budget-wise. How does Google work with smaller companies, with either partners, suppliers, to start to think about how to motivate them really around these values and where to start. I think it's often an intimidating ask.
So as an example, the space we're in now is one way in which.
Stand up. Fine. We can stand up.
So the example is the space we're in right now. This is the center we opened in December 2022. Since then, we've had almost 6,000 people from outside Google come through to have a talk about inclusive design, to have a talk about progress over perfection, about making mistakes and learning from it, and giving people the language and giving people an example of one company, a big company, that's made this commitment, and then try to inspire them with the opportunity of innovation, inspire with the opportunity of impacting people's lives, whether it's through their products or through their culture. So we try to lead by example and bring people into the tent and do that. We also do, through our philanthropic arm, Google.org, invest in CICs and nonprofits to try to create opportunities and technologies and spaces. Surrey's recently gotten a grant. So we try to invest also in empowering spaces and ideas to make it more easy to do the right thing.
And can I just say also in a slightly, in quite an open way. So Anna was talking before about straws. In this space, there is some straws over there in the jar. And Open Inclusion, a tiny little SME, a speck next to a behemoth, we had just done some research with a number of beverage organisations, some of the larger beverage organisations in the world, and done some really interesting research that really highlighted the power of straws in people's lives. We wrote it up, and it's in here, in Google. So that kind of collaboration between tiny little specks and very large organisations, but the insight comes to the fore.
No one has all of the answers. No one has all of the solutions. It's up to each person to craft their solution based off their needs and opportunities and constraints. So all of the pasta straws you gave me have been used and taken. So I just bought some more. But for me, the straws, I've been doing digital accessibility for 10 years. I'd never done physical accessibility much. We had someone here with CP who says, I need a straw to have a drink. It never occurred to me because I had never been exposed to it. So now we have these, and thanks to Open, we now have we now talk about the pasta straws and how something as simple as a drinking straw has room for innovation, and it has to be disability led for us to be able to have those kinds of insights.
Hi, I'm Amanda Murphy. As Adrian mentioned earlier, I'm working with the CDT. I'm head of partnerships and training based at Royal Holloway. I think some of the things you were talking about are absolutely fascinating. Some of having those very specific examples and stories of really kind of make you think much, much, much more about the complications of doing the right thing in this space. But I just want to say a little bit about, you were talking a lot about co-design, collaboration, getting the right people, and who those people are, who has the power, and making sure that ecosystem is big enough and working with the right groups, which we're trying to do at the CDT, working in a really collaborative model. I just wondered if we could start a kind of our tent, your tent. So we're obviously building our tents, and there's only a certain number. As you say, this is a patient, slow process. Bringing people in and trying to do something that's really relevant, rather than just trying to make some change for the sake of change, which is hard. How do we share knowledge across tents rather than just within the tents? Is my question.
There's no easy way. I'm sorry. There's sort of an impedance mismatch in terms of awareness and access to the information. So there's all of this information coming at you all the time, and we're all busy, so we have this much attention, and then we only have this much attention to think about this kind of space, and then we have this much attention when we're listening to the right thing at the right time. Because if you say the right thing and they're not paying attention, it goes away. This is the problem we have with the technologies that we're creating. Your phone can do more things than you realize because you've never needed to use it. And by that time you need to use it, you're so used to using it, you don't even think to look. So the challenge is not only how do we share information, but when do we share it and how often do we share it? Because I spend 3 to 5 times a week, probably once or twice a day, telling the same stories, teaching about the same things, because everybody that comes in has never heard of this. So these 6,000 people that have come through leave here knowing something they've never known before. And hopefully they can take it and share it with people either in their business or in their lives or for themselves a little bit later in their lives. So it is how do we share information, and there's There are many ways to do that. There's conferences, there's blog posts, there's videos. Everybody does those, but because everybody's doing that, how do you sort of stand out? And then you have the influencer thing. But who's really going to be the Beyonce of the disability research world? It's probably hard. Rama, that's going to be you. You're going to be the Beyonce of inclusion. No, but do a dance. Well, you can too. But the point is, it's not just how do we share the information, but we need to be ready to share it again and again and again for it really to have the impact that we want. So how do we share it, but also how do we share it impactfully?
And I think just to add to that, how do we share it inclusively? Because we're not all listening the same way. And not just in terms of our physical needs, but we all have our own biases of where our positionality, of why we're listening, of what we're looking for. So to learn how to, and you're a master of this, and we work really hard at Open to do this, how do we tell a story in the round? How do we tell a story so that the person at the middle or the people at the middle all get it in the way that's relevant to them, that it actually lands? And you see the end of our session today was, here are lots of different things. I don't expect you all will take away the same one. But if you all take away one, we've succeeded. So how do we talk in the round? And back to your thing about the right time and the right message, absolutely. And one thing, we've worked with a lot of organisations where they work on inclusive design to make their products and services better. That's awesome. Are they telling anyone? How does the consumer actually know that that characteristic has now been built into that product, that service, that environment they've just improved? Now, this is a bit of a dance, though, because if you go out and put a whole lot of press out and say, we're the best, I'm going to call someone in the positive today. I love it when this happens. Primark have just put out their adaptive clothing range for adults. It's beautiful. It was co-created with disabled people. The woman who's led the design of it is a beautiful designer. It's going to be at low cost, and it's really lovely, subtle design. And yes, it's not going to work for everyone, but it's a really good positive step forward. Now, if they did that and didn't tell anyone, that's not very helpful. But if they went and told everyone they're doing the best thing and it's amazing and you should see it, it's solved all the problems of the world for 50 pieces of clothing, that's gone ahead of the reality as well. So it's this dance between building capability and telling people about it, building more capability and telling people about that. And if one goes ahead of the other, it's actually problematic as well. So
if I could be just a little nuance to this, you actually want to communicate a little ahead of what's actually there, because it takes time for things to sink in. I can't tell you how many times we released something, we've done a blog post, we've done a video, and for a month and a half, the uptake isn't great, but all of a sudden something happens and then people get it. So you need to communicate a little early, not too early, because you don't want it to be vaporware or shadowware and lose credibility. So you don't want to do it too early, but you want to do it a little early enough so that when people actually get a chance to hear it, again, because of that attention aspect of things, then you're ready. So it's a hard. There's no subtle answer. There's no easy answer for that. But you need to be a little early.
And I think a little early, and we say from early and a little and often.
Yeah.
And also through many voices. So bringing the disability community in and saying, where do you want to see it? How do you wish to learn? And if there's a technology capability, we've done a lot of work in transport, and there's so much technology that can help people in transport. And with the RNIB, we did a whole year worth of research on travelling well with tech. There's so much capability that people don't know is there, and they might know one bit and they're using that really fully, and they might be missing another bit. And getting the right person telling them, and we've been learning about how people learn, so that it's not that we're there telling them, or RNIB is telling them, or Google's telling them, but wherever they're learning from, hopefully is going to be telling them in the way that they wish to learn.
So it's like you're touching it, but you're not really touching it, basically.
People are bringing so many different perspectives, and it's such an interdisciplinary space that really benefits from bringing everybody together.
For me, this research is really important because it starts to highlight how big tech like Google, companies like Open Inclusion, and the academic sector can work together to produce really meaningful research that no one of those partners would necessarily think to do.
Now we have thoughtful analysis of the community, of experts that can tell us, yes, there's a problem, yes, people are scared, and yes, there's an opportunity, but also give us some direction in terms of what we
what we can work towards to address some of these issues. I found that really inspiring.
If you were going to design a tennis racket, you would bring Serena Williams in, because if it's good enough for her, it's good enough for us. And it's like that with people who are differently abled. If you can design a vehicle for a person with visual impairments to use, or mobility needs, you get it right for the rest of us. Simple as that. And AI, we need to understand that. We need to make that link.